Why was everyone watching her like they were waiting for her to fail? Captain Ashley Storm Carter could feel the unspoken doubts hanging in the air as she stepped onto the tarmac at Fort Rucker. The Apache AH-64 sat ahead of her, blades glinting. Under the Alabama sun, its presence equal parts invitation and judgment. She had been flying long enough to know that reputations were fragile things in the Army. One weakness, one blind spot, and the whispers would follow you from base to base. And for Ashley, that blind spot had a name: adverse weather, to her instructors. It was her Achilles heel. To her, it was just another problem waiting to be solved. But today wasn't about theories or confidence. It was her final evaluation pass, and she'd wear the coveted Apache patch, fail, and, well, she didn't allow her mind to finish that sentence. The hangar doors yawned open, letting in the faint smell of jet fuel and metal. Chief Warrant Officer Michael "Thunder" Rodriguez was waiting, leaning against a railing clipboard. In hand, he didn't smile. "Captain Carter," he said, voice clipped, "you're flying under clear skies as textbook, but combat doesn't wait for blue skies. You know what today's about." "I do, Chief." Her voice was steady. But inside she could already feel the heat of the simulator cockpit and the fight it would take to keep her mind clear when the storm rolled in. Real or simulated? Rodriguez led her to the simulator bay, a half circle of screens surrounded. The motion platform, the kind of setup that could fool your senses into believing you were actually airborne. Ashley strapped in, the seat creaking beneath her, the cyclic cool in her right hand, collective under her left. "Scenario," Rodriguez began. "Severe turbulence. Heavy crosswinds, zero visibility, your task. Maintain control, complete the course, execute weapons drills. Let's see if you can keep that bird in the air when the weather's trying to tear it apart." The simulation roared to life outside the wraparound screens. Sunlight vanished into gray chaos. Rain streaked across the canopy. Crosswinds shoved at the fuselage like invisible hands. Ashley felt her shoulders tense. She focused on the numbers. Torque, rotor RPM, wind shear readings. She eased into the inputs, trying not to fight the gusts. But the simulator jolted violently. Tilting hard to the left, her stomach lurched. "Watch her yaw drift." Rodriguez's voice cut in. She adjusted. But another gust shoved her nose offline. The simulated horizon spun in a way she hated. The temptation to overcorrect was there, clawing at her instincts. "I've got it," she muttered. 10 minutes later, they emerged into simulated clear air, but the score flashed red. Below standard in weather handling, again, when the canopy hissed open. Rodriguez didn't gloat, but he didn't hide his concern. "Either. Carter, you've got precision. I'll give you that. But this isn't about knowing the manual. In the field, weather like that will kill you if you can't handle it." Before she could answer, a new voice joined them, Colonel Patricia. "Hurricane Thompson." The program commander stepped into view, arms folded. She had the kind of presence that made the air feel heavier. "Carter," Thompson said, "combat doesn't wait for perfect conditions. You'll fly in storms, dust, snow, whatever the battlefield throws at you. And if you can't handle that..." She let the thought hang, like a blade suspended over Ashley's career. Ashley stood straighter. "With respect, ma'am, my difficulties in severe weather aren't a weakness. I process more atmospheric data than most. I'm learning to use." That sensitivity, that earned her a raised eyebrow from Thompson, but no agreement. Later, in the break room, her primary instructor, Major David "Lightning" Stevens, dropped into the chair across from her. He set down 2 coffees, pushing one toward her. "You know, Ashley," he began, "you might have the sharpest brain in the class when it comes to aerodynamics, but flying an Apache isn't about thinking. Not when you've got zero visibility and the wind's slamming you around. It's about instinct, feel, and you're still hesitating." She took a sip of coffee. Eyes on the window where an actual Alabama storm cloud was rolling in. "Or maybe," she said slowly, I'm just feeling more than they realize. I've been studying the patterns. The pressure changes before a gust. The microbursts, there's a rhythm to it. I just haven't had the right chance to prove it. Stevens gave her a long, measuring look. Prove it then. Just be ready for when that chance isn't in a simulator. That chance came 7 months later. The Gulf Coast was bracing for Hurricane Isabella, a Category 4 monster churning toward Texas. Winds sustained at 145 miles an hour, gusts topping 170. While most civilians were evacuating inland, Ashley was flying into Houston. When she landed at Ellington Field, the air was already electric with tension. The emergency briefing room was packed. Officers, meteorologists, intel analysts on. The big screen, satellite imagery showed a swirling mass of clouds and an ominous red path toward the coastline. Colonel Thompson was at the front. "We have a developing situation," she began. "An enemy force has landed near Galveston, 15 T-90 Maine. Battle tanks, plus infantry support. They're using the storm as cover to establish a beachhead. All conventional aircraft are grounded. That gives them 12 to 18 hours to dig in before we can hit them. Unless—" Her eyes swept the room and landed on Ashley. "Captain Carter, you're Apache Solo 1 for Operation Stormbreak. Your mission: close air support, neutralize armor positions, prevent inland advance. You launch at 1400 hours, which means you'll be flying into the hurricane at peak strength." The room shifted. A murmur of disbelief. Rodriguez, who had been flown in from Fort Rucker just for this op, spoke up. "Colonel, with respect, that's suicide. Those wind shears will tear the aircraft apart. Visibility's 0. We can't even get a drone in there." Ashley's heart was hammering, but her voice was steady. "Chief, I've been preparing for this. I've studied Isabella's wind patterns. There are corridors, rotational zones. If I work with the storm instead of fighting it, I can maneuver, even gain an advantage. You think you can use a hurricane for cover?" Rodriguez demanded. "I know I can," she replied. "The storm's chaos is predictable if you know where to look." An hour before launch, Ashley sat alone in the cockpit, the Apache systems humming quietly, her call sign for the mission. Storm 1 flashed on her display. She checked and rechecked her targeting systems, thermal imaging, and navigation data. The rain was already hammering the hangar roof like drumfire. She thought about every moment since that simulator ride at Fort Rucker. The frustration, the looks, the quiet assumption that she'd never be able to do this. And somewhere beneath the fear, there was a spark of satisfaction. This was her chance, not in front of a screen, but with real stakes, real consequences. Rodriguez came to the side of the cockpit. He didn't look happy, but his voice was quieter now. "Carter, you come back. You'll make history. You don't." He left it there. She met his gaze. "I'll come back." And then, without waiting for further words, she lowered her helmet, sealed the canopy, and listened to the thump of the rotors. Building to life, the mission clock ticked down. Out beyond the hangar doors, Hurricane Isabella was making landfall, and Ashley Carter was flying straight into its heart. Why was it so quiet right before the storm swallowed her? Ashley eased the Apache forward, rotor wash kicking spray from the rain-slicked tarmac at Ellington Field. The world outside was already losing color. Blue sky erased by walls of gray, shapes blurred by wind-driven rain. The control tower's voice was calm, almost too calm, as if the controllers didn't want to betray how insane this was. "Storm 1, you are cleared for takeoff. Godspeed." She pulled collective, the Apache lifting into the thickening air, skids breaking free from the safety of the ground. Immediately, the first gust hit, not a nudge, a shove. The nose dipped. The tail swung a fraction. She corrected gently, resisting the urge to muscle the bird back into line. Fight the storm, you lose. Flow with it, you live. Within minutes, she was in. The outer bands, the light died fast. replaced by a murky twilight at 2 in the afternoon. Rain didn't fall here. It traveled sideways, each drop a tiny projectile slamming into the canopy. Debris, scraps of metal, branches, even a billboard ripped from its frame, flashed. Past in chaotic arcs, her headset crackled. Ground control. Forward air controller call sign Talon 6. Storm 1. We've lost drone coverage. We're blind out here. You're it. Copy, Talon 6. Ashley replied. Entering operational. Area now. Stand by for contact reports. She flicked to thermal imaging at first. The display was a blur. White-hot rain scatter. Pockets of heat everywhere. But she had studied this storm's structure for days. She adjusted the filters, tuned out background noise, narrowed the signature band until the chaos cleared. And there they were. Distinct, blocky thermal outlines that could only be armor. Ground control, Storm 1, she said. I have multiple thermal contacts. 15 armored vehicles, beach-line defensive positions, infantry scattered between them. The hurricane's temperature differentials are enhancing signature contrast, better than clear skies. On the other end, a pause. Then, disbelief. Say again, Storm 1. You have positive ID? Affirmative. They can't see me. They can't hear me. Beginning approach. The storm was alive around her. Bands of wind like invisible rivers rushed past, and she slipped into them, letting each one sling her toward the next angle of attack. Conventional doctrine said stay stable, minimize exposure. But conventional doctrine wasn't built for a Category 4 hurricane. She was invisible here, a phantom moving with the rhythm of the storm. Her first hellfire lock came in the lull. Between gusts, she used the wind shear as a pivot, swinging her nose on target. Laser painting the first T-90 through a haze of driven water. She squeezed the trigger. The missile leapt away, vanishing into the wall of rain, and a heartbeat later. The thermal display flared bright white. The tank's heat signature bloomed, then faded as it vanished from the display. Target 1 destroyed, she reported. Already shifting position, she didn't linger. The storm's currents caught her again, pushing her downwind, and she let it, riding the gusts toward the next contact. Target 2. Lock, fire, vanish. Then target 3. Each time, she moved. Before the enemy could orient, Talon 6's voice was tight now. Storm 1. We are reading multiple secondary explosions, confirming 3 tanks destroyed. How are you holding targeting accuracy in this mess? Ashley almost smiled. The storm is stabilizing my firing solutions. Consistent atmospheric pressure. Temperature contrast on the targets. They stand out like beacons. But it wasn't just about the shots. It was about movement. She'd learned the hurricane's vertical layers, where updrafts lifted her like an elevator and downdrafts pushed her into sharp descents. She used them the way another pilot might use terrain. Dropping out of one band, punching into another, appearing in places the enemy couldn't predict. Target 4 died without warning. Then 5. 6 and 7 followed within minutes. Each hit a clean kill. Storm 1. Talon 6 called. Enemy. Infantry is breaking. They can't get their anti-air up in this wind. That was good. But the break never lasts long. The warning came fast. Storm 1. New thermal signatures inbound from inland, armor, and mobile SAMs. Count 8 additional tanks. Repeat. 8. Plus 2 confirmed anti-aircraft systems in the Apache's canopy. They appeared as red-hot shapes pushing through the storms. Curtain, moving slow but deliberate. Any other pilot would have broken off. Regrouped, waited for conditions to improve. That wasn't an option. Ground control. Storm 1, Ashley said, voice flat. Engaging reinforcements. The storm's giving me cover they don't have. She pivoted her Apache into a crosswind. That would terrify most aviators. Wind sheer enough to shove the entire aircraft sideways. But to her, it was the perfect slide into a flank. She dropped in low, almost skimming the surface of the floodwaters, now consuming the coastal roads. Using the storm's howl to mask her rotor noise, Target 8. Gone before they knew she was there. Target 9. A hellfire from above, diving through the eyewall's edge, hitting hard enough to rip the turret from the chassis. The SAM sights were trickier. She climbed, letting an updraft hurl her higher than she'd ever dared in a combat zone, the Apache trembling but steady in her hands. She cut through the outer band and dove, straight down, hellfire screaming ahead of her. SAM Site 1, destroyed. 2, destroyed before it could even orient its radar. Talon 6, anti-air. Neutralized, she reported, breath tight from the dive. Continuing armor engagement. That's when they tried to get clever. Storm 1, Talon 6 called. Enemy armor is adjusting movements with wind patterns. They're timing their pushes with the gusts. Ashley almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. They don't understand. I'm not fighting the hurricane. I'm flying with it. She watched their positions shift on thermal, the exact moments they thought the wind gave them cover. But those same gusts were predictable to her. The way an ocean current is to a sailor who studied the tide. She slipped into their blind spots, letting the hurricane shove her into perfect firing lines. Target 10, 11, 12. Each fell. In sequence, the storm now as much her weapon as her helicopter was. The last 3 tanks tried to run. She saw their heat signatures fade toward the inland edge of the storm's chaos, desperate to escape into calmer weather. But there was no escaping her now. She dove with the gust, closing the gap faster than they could react. Target 13, 14, all erased from the battlefield in less than 2 minutes. She exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. Talon 6, all enemy armor neutralized. Beachhead eliminated. There was a pause on the comms, and then, quietly, Storm 1. We're calling it. That was impossible, and you just did it. Ashley looked out through the canopy into the roiling wall of Hurricane Isabella. Impossible? Maybe for everyone else, but she'd known all along. The storm wasn't the enemy. The storm was the reason she was still alive. Why did the silence feel heavier than the storm? Ashley hovered over the shattered coastline. The Apache steady in the hurricane's chaos, like it had been built for this sky. Her last hellfire impact still smoldered on the thermal display, but there were no new signatures, no movement, no return fire. The mission was over. She let herself drift in the wind, rotors thumping slow and measured, the adrenaline beginning to bleed out of her system for the first time in 3 hours. Her hands felt the faint ache from gripping the cyclic and collective too tightly. She forced herself to breathe, in through the nose, out through the mouth, the kind of controlled breath she'd learned years ago to keep her mind from locking up under pressure. Storm 1, Talon 6 called softly, like they were speaking to someone who had just stepped out of a burning building. You are clear of all threats. RTB when ready. Copy, she said, voice low. She wasn't sure she wanted to turn back yet. The storm still wrapped around her like a living thing, and somewhere deep down, she wasn't ready to leave it. Not because of the danger, but because of what it had just proven. The Category 4 winds, the zero visibility, the chaos of debris, all the reasons they said she shouldn't even try, had become the very tool she used to win. It wasn't just survival, it was mastery. The return flight was surreal. She retraced her route through the storm's bands, letting the same wind corridors guide her back out. The turbulence felt almost gentle now. Every shift, every microburst, every gust carried a familiar rhythm. When the lights of Ellington Field appeared through the rain, she slowed, keeping her approach deliberate. The control tower came alive. Storm 1 Tower, you are. On final approach, runway clear. All eyes on you, Captain. She touched down without a jolt. The Apache skid, settling into the slick tarmac as if it had been an ordinary training sortie. But the moment she powered down and lifted the canopy, she realized nothing about this landing was ordinary. A line of officers stood waiting, Not the usual post-mission crew with ground crew and clipboard checklists. This was brass, Colonel Thompson, Chief Rodriguez, Major Stevens, even a few faces she didn't recognize, their uniforms heavy with medals and years of command. The rain plastered their hair and uniforms, but no one moved to take shelter. They were watching her like they were trying to figure out what they'd just witnessed. Ashley climbed down, boots splashing in shallow puddles, helmet tucked under her flight suit was soaked through, but the adrenaline still kept her warm. Colonel Thompson stepped forward first. "Carter." Her voice caught just slightly, and Ashley had never heard that from her before. "What you accomplished today isn't just remarkable, it's impossible. According to every flight manual, you should not have been able to get off the ground in that weather, let alone." She glanced back at the others. 15 confirmed armor kills, multiple support vehicles, anti-air neutralized. No damage to your aircraft. Ashley met her gaze, steady. "Ma'am, maybe the manuals need updating." That earned her the faintest smile from Thompson before. She stepped back. Rodriguez approached next. His face was unreadable until he spoke. "Storm, I've been flying helicopters for 20 years. I've seen pilots survive storms, but never use one like you did. You didn't just fly through it, you weaponized it." He shook his head slowly. "I came here expecting to watch you fail. I'll own that, but I just saw something I'll be telling every pilot I train for the rest of my life." She nodded once. "You told me once that bad weather would kill me if I couldn't handle it. Maybe, or maybe. If you understand it, it'll keep you alive." Stevens came last. He didn't speak right away, just studied her face like he was remembering something. "Ashley," he said finally, "that thing I called a weakness? That sensitivity you had to every gust, every pressure change." She tilted her head. "What about it?" "It wasn't a weakness. It was prep work. For this. For something no other pilot in the world could have done." They debriefed her in a secure conference room. A full sit-down with mission playback, thermal imagery, and her flight path laid over meteorological data. Watching it back was strange. The hurricane bands looked like an angry, spiraling beast, and her Apache was a flicker of motion weaving in and out of its ribs. Every shot was precise. Every movement was intentional. And yet, even as she explained her methods, reading wind corridors, anticipating gust timing, using temperature differentials for thermal targeting, she could see disbelief in the eyes of the analysts. "This changes doctrine," one of the intel officers said quietly. "We've always treated extreme weather as operational dead zones. If this can be replicated—" "It can," Ashley interrupted. "But it's not about brute force. It's about listening. Storms have structure, patterns. Once you know them, you don't fight them. You dance with them." Some scribbled notes, others just stared. The official mission record was filed that night. Most successful solo helicopter engagement. In extreme weather conditions on record, but unofficially, word spread faster than the storm had moved over the Gulf. By morning, she was getting calls from pilots she'd never met, asking how she'd ridden a Category 4 without losing control. She didn't give them the full answer. Not yet. The techniques, the training adjustments, the mental shift, that would take time to teach. And not everyone would believe her until they saw it work. For now, she just told them the truth in its simplest form. Don't fight the storm. That night, in her quarters, she finally let the exhaustion in. She set her helmet on the desk, sat down heavily on the bunk, and just listened to the rain still lashing the walls outside. Her body ached in places she hadn't noticed in the cockpit. Shoulders, forearms, even her jaw from hours of tension. On the shelf above her desk sat a framed patch from her training days, the Apache insignia she'd earned at Fort Rucker. Next to it was a photo of her and Stevens after her first solo flight, both graying despite the Alabama humidity. She thought about that simulator ride, the red below standard score flashing in front of her. The voices telling her she'd never be able to fly in conditions like today. And now, those same conditions had been the reason she'd just saved a coastline. Her eyes closed for a moment, the sound of the storm outside fading into the background. She didn't need to relive the whole mission tonight. There would be time for that. Now, she let herself feel just one thing. Not pride, not defiance, but quiet vindication. Because sometimes the only way to prove you belong in the sky is to fly into the one everyone else avoids. Why did the battle feel easier than what came after? Ashley woke before dawn, not because of an alarm, but because her mind refused to stay still. The storm had passed overnight, leaving the Gulf air heavy with the scent of brine and debris. The news was already running loops of half-accurate reports. Pilot braves hurricane. Unprecedented solo mission. Apache Ace ends beachhead in 3 hours. They made it sound cinematic, but she could feel the truth under her skin. This wasn't the end of anything. In military terms, victory didn't mean closure. It meant questions. By the time she reached the operations building, the conference rooms were already buzzing. Uniforms she didn't recognize were packed around long tables, voices low but urgent. The moment she stepped inside, conversation shifted, not silent, but different, measured, watching. Colonel Thompson waved her over. Carter, sit. On the wall, a map of the Galveston coastline glowed with overlays of her flight path, thermal, hit conformations, and meteorological patterns. We've got intel, Thompson began. But first, this briefing is being attended by command from Aviation Doctrine Center, Army Research Lab, and Pentagon observers. What you did in Isabella is already causing discussions at the highest level. One of the visitors, silver-haired, with a ranger tab that looked decades old, leaned forward. Captain, I've been in the Army 30 years. I've never seen anything like your mission report, and frankly, I'm not sure I believe it. Ashley didn't flinch. Sir, the data's there, every lock, every kill, every maneuver is logged. You can match it against the storm's recorded wind patterns. That's not the point, he said. Even if it's true, it sets a dangerous precedent. We have safety protocols for a reason. You're telling me you want us to send pilots into hurricanes now? She glanced at Thompson before answering. No, sir. I'm saying we've underestimated what's possible if we train for it. We've treated weather as a wall, not a tool. But the storm structure can be read and used. That's what I did. Another officer, younger but no less skeptical, chimed in. Or maybe you just got lucky, right place, right time, right pilot. Try it again, and you might not come back. Ashley let the jab pass. Maybe. Or maybe we've been building pilots to fight conditions instead of working with them. Thompson cut in. This isn't about sending everyone into hurricanes. It's about expanding capability where possible. Carter's mission shows the tactical advantage severe weather can offer if understood. By noon, she'd been shuffled into 2 more meetings, one with aviation engineers who wanted every second of her sensor data, another with an intelligence group interested in her tactical mapping of the hurricane's eye-wall corridors. Some were fascinated, others were openly hostile. In the hallway, Rodriguez caught up to her. Storm, you're not making friends in there. She raised an eyebrow. Because I survived? Because you proved them wrong, he said. You broke rules they built careers defending. They can't ignore your results. But they don't want to rewrite the book for one pilot. She thought about that all afternoon. In combat, enemies. War uniforms you could see. Here, resistance was invisible, hidden in policies and quiet conversations. That evening, she finally found time to call her parents. They'd seen the news, of course. The Army hadn't released her name yet, but they knew. Her father's voice was quiet. You always did like storms. Remember that summer in Florida? You'd sit on the porch when the rest of us went inside. She smiled faintly. Guess I never stopped watching the wind. Her mother, though, was sharper. They're going to ask you to do it again, aren't they? Ashley hesitated. If they do, I'll be ready. And if they don't? Then I'll teach others. She didn't say what she was really thinking, but she wasn't sure they'd let her teach anyone. Not yet. The next day, she was ordered back to Fort Rucker for a post-mission review and instruction reassessment. That sounded harmless. It wasn't. In the training hangar where she'd once stared down the simulator's storm graphics, a panel of evaluators sat waiting. They wanted her to explain every maneuver, every targeting choice, every decision point. And they didn't make it easy. What if your thermal imaging had failed? One asked. I had contingency nav routes mapped from storm data. She replied, what if the wind shear had shifted unexpectedly? It did. I was already compensating 3 seconds before the shift. What if? She cut him off, politely. But firmly, sir, I understand the hypotheticals. But the difference is, I wasn't reacting to the storm. I was anticipating it. That earned a pause. Then someone in the back, a civilian meteorologist, spoke for the first time. She's right. I've reviewed the flight telemetry against NOAA's data. She was flying in sync with the storm's rotational vectors. That's not luck. That's prediction. The room went quiet. In the weeks that followed, the Army quietly began cataloging her techniques, not officially doctrine, but under review. She was asked to brief small groups of pilots on storm pattern recognition. Though it was always framed as optional training, still, the pushback persisted. Some commanders flat out refused to even hear her presentations. Others nodded politely, then ignored the data. Rodriguez's words stayed with her. You proved them wrong, and that's the problem. But she'd been underestimated before. And storms had a way of changing the landscape, whether people wanted them to or not. One evening, she stood alone on the flight line at Rucker, watching an approaching thunderhead turn the horizon black. The air grew heavy, warm, alive with the charge before the rain. She closed her eyes and listened, the way she had in Isabella, the way she always had. Patterns, rhythms, signals, they were all there, waiting for someone willing to hear them. She made herself a quiet promise, even if it took years, even if she had to fight every inch of the way. She'd make sure the next pilot who saw a storm on the radar wouldn't see it as a wall. They'd see what she saw that day over Galveston, an open door. Why did the second time feel heavier than the first? It had been 83 days since Hurricane Isabella, long enough for the headlines to fade, for most of the country to forget there'd been an invasion at all. But inside the Army, the mission hadn't been forgotten. Not by the pilots who whispered her name like a dare, not by the officers quietly dissecting every second of her telemetry, and not by the ones still convinced she'd gotten lucky. On a cold January morning, her phone rang at 0417. She knew before she picked up that it wouldn't be good. Captain Carter. Colonel Thompson's voice was clipped but urgent. Report to command. We have a developing situation. You'll want to hear this in person. By 0600, she was in a secure operations room at Fort Rucker, staring at weather maps that made her stomach tighten. An Arctic system, not a hurricane this time, but a blizzard, was tearing across the northern plains. Winds at 60 knots, near zero visibility. Temperatures low enough to freeze hydraulic lines in minutes, and in the middle of it, an Allied forward operations post in Montana had gone dark. Satellite imagery hinted at enemy sabotage. Comms arrays destroyed. Supply convoys intercepted. Ground units couldn't get close. Whiteout conditions were swallowing roads, grounding fixed-wing support, and locking everyone in place. This is a rescue and denial mission, Thompson said. We've got 36 personnel stranded and sensitive equipment on site. If they're captured, we're looking at a breach of classified systems. We need eyes in the storm, close air support if necessary, and immediate extraction coordination. Ashley scanned the data. You want me to fly in this? It wasn't a question. Rodriguez, leaning in the corner, muttered, Of course they do. But another voice, this one knew, Brigadier General Holly. A man she hadn't met before, cut in sharply. Let's be clear. We're not calling you because we believe in your doctrine. We're calling you because you're the only one we can't rule out as a potential asset in this weather. This is a test case. Ashley didn't take the bait. Then let's make sure it's a success. 2 hours later, she was in pre-flight on an AH-64 variant fitted with cold weather modifications, blade deicers, insulated avionics base, extra thermal, shielding for the engines. Still, no one pretended it would be easy. Cold like this killed machines almost as fast as it killed people. Before she climbed in, Thompson pulled her aside. "They're watching, Carter. This isn't just about saving those people. It's about whether your name stays in training manuals or gets erased from them." Ashley met her eyes. "Then I guess we better bring everyone home." The storm's edge hit before she was even 30 miles out. Snow didn't fall here. It assaulted, blasting sideways in sheets that turned the world white. Ground reference disappeared. Horizon lines blurred into nothing. Her training with hurricanes didn't translate perfectly. Snowstorms had different wind patterns, subtler layers, but the principles were the same. She found the low-level currents were friction off. The terrain shaped narrow bands of calmer air. She kept the Apache low enough to avoid the worst of the shear, but high enough to clear the terrain's hidden ridges. Talon 6's voice came over comms, a familiar anchor. "Storm 1, be advised. Thermal imaging is degraded in this environment. Snow and cold are masking some signatures." "Copy," she said, already adjusting her sensor gain. The cold actually had one advantage. Machinery stayed warmer than the environment, meaning vehicles and generators glowed hot even against the snow's interference. The first contacts appeared faintly. 2 hostile transport vehicles half buried in drifted snow. Attempting to flank the Allied outpost, she banked into position, using the wind to slow her drift until her Hellfire tone locked on. 2 shots, 2 hits, the explosions muffled by the storm. Swallowed almost instantly into the white void. Minutes later, she caught sight of the outpost itself, or rather, the dark smear of its structures half lost under snowpack. Several buildings had already collapsed under ice weight. Smoke, faint but visible, curled up from one corner. "Storm 1 to ground. I've got visual on the site. Advise status." Static. Then a voice, choked with interference. "We're pinned. They've got armor on the north slope, infantry closing. From the south, no comms, no power." She circled wide, using a ridge as cover, and spotted the tanks, 2 of them. Their tracks carving slow arcs through the drifts. The wind gave her the perfect approach vector. She let it shove her into line, locked tone, and fired. The first tank disappeared in a rolling cloud of snow and flame. The second tried to pivot. Toward her, turrets swinging sluggish in the cold, but she'd already dropped below the ridge and re-emerged at its flank. One more shot, and the threat was gone. "North slope clear," she called. "Prep for extraction support." But the storm had other plans on her thermal scope. A new cluster of signatures appeared. Enemy reinforcements inbound from the east. Using snowmobiles and tracked light transports, smaller, faster, harder to hit in whiteout conditions. She throttled forward, letting the headwind steady her aim. Gun pods opened up. 30mm rounds, stitching lines through the drifts. The recoil coupled with the wind made her corrections instinctive, no overthinking. Just feel, one by one, the blips faded from her display. The last transport tried to break away downslope, but she dipped into a low air current, rode it like a river, and came up on its tail. A burst of fire and it vanished. By the time she landed in a clearing just outside the outpost perimeter, the blizzard was closing in harder, visibility dropping to a few dozen meters. Extraction birds were inbound, but they'd need her to guide them through the storm. She stepped out into the snow, headset still linked, and became their beacon, talking them in overcomes, marking safe vectors with her Apache's position lights. One by one, the transports touched down. loaded the survivors, and clawed their way back into the air. When the last one cleared, she climbed back into her cockpit, engines protesting in the cold, and lifted off into the white. Hours later, back at base, she barely made it to the hangar. Before Holly intercepted her, "You got 'em all out," he said. "Not a question." "Yes, sir." He studied her for a long moment. "We'll review the data, but maybe you weren't just lucky in Isabella." She didn't smile. "Luck's just preparation meeting the right storm, sir." That night, she sat alone again, the blizzard still roaring outside the windows. This mission had been different. Not as dramatic in the public eye, maybe, but in some ways harder. Hurricanes had been violent but predictable. Blizzards were quieter, deceptive, patient killers. And she'd beaten one. She knew then that the pushback would keep coming. But so would the calls. They could resist her doctrine all they wanted. Storms weren't going away, and neither was she. Why did it feel like the real fight was just starting? The Montana mission didn't make the news the way Hurricane Isabella had. There were no dramatic satellite images, no looping footage of a storm swallowing a coastline, just a quiet line in the military incident log. Allied personnel recovered. Site secured. No friendly casualties inside the walls of command. Though, it was a different story. By the time Ashley got back to Fort Rucker, the after-action reports were already moving through channels she didn't have clearance to see. She could feel it in the way people looked at her. Less disbelief now, more calculation. Some saluted quicker than before. Others avoided her entirely, as if acknowledging her meant admitting they'd been wrong. The debrief started at 0800 sharp. In a room lined with screens displaying weather maps, mission telemetry, and heat map targeting logs from her Apache systems, Colonel Thompson led the briefing. But Ashley quickly realized she wasn't the one Thompson was trying to convince. It was the half-dozen senior officers and civilian analysts seated along the back wall. "This," Thompson said, pointing at the playback of Ashley's flight path through the blizzard, "wasn't luck. Carter anticipated wind band shifts 6 to 8 seconds before they occurred. She adjusted altitude to ride stable layers, reduced exposure to shear, and maintained weapons accuracy at a level comparable to clear weather engagements." One of the civilians, a weather scientist from the Army Research Lab, leaned forward. "We've been modeling those exact bands for years. What she's doing isn't theoretical. It's exactly how the models behave. The difference is, she's doing it in real time, in combat." The man beside him, an officer with aviation doctrine center tabs, shifted in his seat. "Or she's just one of those pilots with freak instincts we can't build a program on." An anomaly. Ashley had heard this argument before. She kept her voice steady. "Sir, instincts are built. I wasn't born knowing how to read a hurricane's rotation or a blizzard's low-level corridors. I studied them. I flew them. This can be taught." There was a beat of silence before Thompson spoke again. "Which is exactly what we're proposing. That's..." When they dropped the folder in front of her, on the cover, "Extreme Weather Aviation Test Program, Preliminary Directive." The pitch was simple but dangerous. A 6-month trial at Fort Rucker, pairing select pilots with meteorologists, engineers, and flight instructors to develop training protocols for combat operations in conditions currently considered non-flyable. In plain terms, they wanted to see if they could turn Carter's way into doctrine, but it wasn't a free win. The terms were brutal. She wouldn't pick the pilots. She wouldn't have final say over the curriculum. Every flight would be recorded, dissected, and picked apart by evaluators, many of whom still thought her methods were reckless. If the program failed, they'd call it proof that her success had been unrepeatable. "You realize," Rodriguez said quietly when they stepped into the hallway, "this is them giving you the rope. They want to see if you hang yourself with it." Ashley looked at the folder in her hands. "Then I'll use it to pull the next pilot through the storm." The first week of the program was chaos. They brought in 8 pilots from different units, some combat veterans, some fresh from training. The weather simulation labs ran nonstop, pushing conditions from sandstorms to ice fog to typhoon-force crosswinds. From the start, Ashley saw the divide. Half the pilots were curious, willing to experiment. The other half were resistant, convinced this was an elaborate waste of time. During one training sortie in the simulator, a captain from the resistant group snapped after his third simulated crash. "This is insane. No real commander would send us up in this garbage." Ashley kept her tone level. "No real commander has to, until they do. And if that day comes, you'd better be ready to fly anyway." Some of them got it. Most didn't. Not yet. Outside the simulators, she pushed for something the program designers hadn't planned: actual weather flights. Not just controlled tests, but real-world sorties in live conditions. The first chance came 2 weeks in, when a line of severe thunderstorms rolled across southern Alabama. Command hesitated. The evaluators called it too soon. Ashley argued until Thompson overrode them. "One aircraft, one pilot, control profile. Carter, this is on you." She picked one of the curious pilots, a lieutenant named Harris, who had shown a knack for reading wind shifts in the simulator. They took an AH-64 Kiowa instead of an Apache for the profile. Just enough lift and maneuverability to test Harris's handling without high-risk combat loads. Ashley flew chase in another bird, talking him through the storm. "Feel the push," she told him over comms as they entered the first cell. "Don't fight it. Let it carry you. Then ease into the counter as it relaxes." When they landed, Harris was grinning under his helmet. "It's not fighting back," he said. "It's working with me. That's the point," she replied. Word spread faster inside the program after that. A few more flights, a few more small wins, and even some of the skeptics started leaning forward in the debriefs, but not everyone was warming up. The aviation doctrine officer from her first briefing showed up unannounced during a simulator session, arms crossed, watching every move she made. When it was over, he pulled her aside. "You're making progress," he admitted. "But don't think for a second that's enough. All it takes is one mishap, one accident, and this whole thing shuts down." She stared at him for a moment. "Then I guess we better not have one." By the end of the first month, the program had something it didn't expect: data, real, measurable improvements in pilot handling under adverse conditions, reduced crash rates in simulations, improved targeting accuracy despite turbulence. It wasn't enough to silence all the critics, but it was enough to keep the program alive. One night, long after the hangars had gone quiet, Ashley stayed behind, watching storm cells flicker on the horizon. Thompson found her there. "You know they didn't think we'd make it this far," Thompson said. Ashley nodded. "They still don't." Thompson smiled faintly. "Then we'll just keep proving them wrong, one storm at a time." Why did the call come before dawn every time? Ashley was halfway through her first coffee when the secure line rang at 0423. She didn't need to guess. Real emergencies didn't wait for office hours. "Carter." Thompson's voice was tight. "Get to the flight line. We've got an incident in the Gulf within minutes." Ashley was standing in the operations bay with the rest of the extreme weather aviation test program cadre. Harris was there, along with the other 7 pilots she'd been training. Most were still in half-zipped flight suits, faces pale under the fluorescent lights on the big screen. A weather radar loop showed a storm system the size of a small country spinning toward Louisiana's coastline. It wasn't a hurricane, but it might as well have been. A tropical cyclone hybrid with sustained winds over 100 knots, torrential rain, and embedded lightning cells. A convoy carrying critical medical supplies for a post-disaster relief zone had stalled near the coast. Flooding had cut off ground access, and all conventional aircraft were grounded. Without the supplies, hundreds of evacuees in shelters would be without antibiotics and critical care gear. "Command wants an airdrop?" one of the skeptical pilots asked. Thompson shook her head. Worse. The convoy's not just stuck. They're under attack. Raiders. We have armed hostiles in the area, using the storm as cover. The supplies are in armored trucks, but they won't hold if the attackers get close enough. Ashley stepped forward. Then we go get them. The Doctrine Center observer, the same officer who'd warned her this program could be killed with one mistake, spoke up from the corner. Absolutely not. These pilots aren't combat certified for conditions like this. They're trained for it, Ashley said sharply. This is exactly what we've been building toward. The argument was short but fierce. Thompson ended it with a single sentence. You all wanted a proof of concept. This is it. The mission plan was drawn in minutes, not hours. 4 helicopters. Ashley in an Apache as lead, Harris in another Apache, and 2 UH-60 Blackhawks configured for cargo and evac. The storm's wind bands would make formation flying impossible, so they'd stagger departure and rendezvous at the convoy coordinates before they walked to the flight line. Ashley gathered her pilots. Everything we've done in the last month comes down to this. She told them, the wind isn't your enemy. The rain isn't your enemy. You've learned to read them. Trust that. Keep your movements clean. Stay ahead of the shifts. And don't force the bird where it doesn't want to go. She looked each one in the eye. We don't just bring back the supplies. We bring back everyone. Takeoff was like flying into a wall. The first gust nearly rolled the Apache. But Ashley had been expecting it. She used it to slingshot into her initial climb, slipping into a calmer layer before banking toward the storm. Lightning flashed ahead, jagged and blinding, followed by the bone-deep rumble of thunder. The rain hit next, so dense it sounded like small arms fire against the canopy. Her HUD showed Harris a quarter-mile off her port side, his Apache bobbing in the currents but holding steady. Behind them, the Blackhawks were just visible as dark smudges against the gray. Storm 1, Talon 6. The forward controller's voice cracked through the static. Convoy is under heavy fire. Hostiles have RPGs. Repeat, RPGs in play. Copy, Talon 6. We're 3 minutes out. The convoy came into view through thermal. 3 armored trucks, heat signatures glowing against the cooler floodwaters, surrounded by smaller, fast-moving shapes. The attackers were using flat-bottom boats to maneuver between submerged roads, closing in from multiple angles. Ashley didn't hesitate. Harris, take the south approach. I'll hit from the north, Blackhawks. Hold until we clear the LZ. She banked into the wind, letting it carry her in a wide arc behind the attackers. The gust shoved her nose down. She let it, then used the updraft to pop over a tree line and drop into weapons range. Her first hellfire cut through the rain, slamming into the lead boat. The explosion was muted by the storm. Just a brief flare of light before the wreckage vanished beneath the waves. Target 1 down, she called. Harris, status? 2 down, moving on 3, Harris replied, his voice steady but tight. The raiders scattered, but the storm betrayed them. Every movement against the wind was sluggish, predictable. Ashley and Harris picked them off one by one, using the gusts to mask their approach until each target was already in the crosshairs. Within 5 minutes, the water was littered with the remains of the attack boats. Convoy secure. Talon 6 confirmed. You're clear to bring in the Hawks, but the mission wasn't over. The convoy trucks were stuck axle deep in floodwater. The only option was to winch the supplies out and lift them aboard the Black Hawks, a process that would keep all aircraft exposed in the storm for at least 20 minutes. Ashley set a defensive pattern, circling wide with Harris to intercept any new threats. The wind was unpredictable now, shifting directions as the storm's eye reformed inland. That's when the second wave hit. Thermal lit up with 6 more boats, this time armed with heavier weapons, likely 50 cal salvaged from somewhere. They were coming fast from the east, using a narrow channel between 2 submerged ridges. Harris "Break high. Cut off the lead boats," Ashley ordered. "I'll sweep the flank." She dove into the gust, letting it sling her low across the water. The attackers opened fire, tracers ripping through the rain. But their aim was useless in the crosswind. Ashley returned fire with her 30 millimeters, walking rounds across the lead boat until it split in two. The others tried to scatter, but the channel trapped them. Harris dropped in from above, hellfire smoke, trails vanishing into the gray as two more targets went up in flames. "East approach clear," Harris reported. By the time the last crate of supplies was secured, the storm's worst bands were already moving inland. The winds eased enough for the Black Hawks to lift without fighting for every foot of altitude, Ashley. And Harris took the rear guard position, following the convoy's aerial escort back toward friendly lines. The rain thinned, lightning faded, and for the first time in hours, the horizon appeared. Storm 1, Talon 6 called. "Mission complete. All supplies intact. 0 friendly casualties." Ashley exhaled slowly, eyes on the fading storm. Behind them, it wasn't just a win. It was proof in front of every skeptic, every observer, every pilot who doubted her, that the training worked outside the simulator. Back at base, the debrief was quieter than usual. No one questioned the decisions. No one tried to chalk it up to luck. Even the Doctrine Center officer approached her afterward. "Carter, I don't like admitting when I'm wrong, but I can't argue with what I saw today. Maybe your way isn't just your way." She didn't gloat. She just nodded. It never was. It's about giving every pilot another option when the weather says they have none. That night, the pilots she'd trained came to her in ones and twos, each with their own version of the same thing. I felt it. The rhythm, the way the wind carried them instead of fighting them. The shift from fear to control. Ashley knew then that the storm had stopped being hers alone. Why did the last flight feel like the first? 3 years had passed since Hurricane Isabella. The name Carter Protocol was now printed in training manuals, referenced in tactical briefings, and whispered in ready rooms from Fort Rucker to forward bases halfway around the world. It wasn't universal. Some commanders still refused to risk aircraft in extreme weather. But the doctrine existed, and more importantly, it was taught. Ashley had spent most of those 3 years in the air or in classrooms, moving between live weather sorties and instructional labs. She'd trained dozens of pilots in reading storm patterns, feeling wind corridors, and using the atmosphere as a tactical partner instead of an enemy. But she'd also learned something else. Every pilot brought their own rhythm to the storm. What worked for her wasn't a perfect copy and paste into someone else's instincts. The Carter Protocol wasn't a script. It was a language, and like any language, each speaker found their own voice in it. Tonight, she stood on the catwalk above the main hangar, looking down at a line of Apaches, Black Hawks, and a pair of newer scout helicopters prepped for deployment. The storm outside was just beginning, a Pacific typhoon curling in toward Guam, its outer bands already rattling the hangar doors. Beside her, Colonel Thompson leaned on the rail. Her hair was more silver now, but her voice hadn't softened. "You don't have to fly this one." Ashley's eyes stayed on the storm-lit horizon. "I know, but she does." She nodded toward the tarmac, where First Lieutenant Kayla Nguyen was running her final pre-flight checks. Kayla was one of Ashley's best, a natural in wind currents with a sixth sense for turbulence shifts. But tonight's mission wasn't about proving her own skill. It was about proving she could lead in the storm, just as Ashley had once done. Ashley would fly in the second Apache, shadowing her, watching, letting her take the lead, unless the weather turned worse than forecast. The mission was simple on paper. Escort a small supply craft through the typhoon's outer band to a damaged radar station on a nearby island. The station's long-range sensors were critical for early warning against incursions in the region. And without them, the area would be blind. But the typhoon's edge was unpredictable. Rain bands hid jagged cliffs. Crosswinds surged and died in seconds. They lifted together, rotors thundering against the gale. Kayla took points, sliding into the first wind corridor with a smoothness that made Ashley's chest tighten, the same way she'd once done it. The same instinctive trust in the storm's rhythm. Lead to shadow. Kyla's voice came over the comms. Corridors holding steady, minimal shear ahead, adjust 2 degrees starboard. Ashley followed, watching how Kayla handled the GUSTS. Gentle on the cyclic, quick on the collective when the downdraft hit. No wasted motion. She didn't fight the storm. She moved with it, midway to the island. A squall cell rolled in faster than expected. Rain hammered the canopies. Visibility dropping to a few meters. The supply craft wavered in its lane, fighting to keep steady. Lead to shadow. I'm taking them high through the sheer break, Kayla called. Ashley checked her own instruments. Kayla's move was risky. The break was narrow, and the updraft on the far side could throw them into the next band hard, but her tone was calm, her voice certain. Shadow to lead, Ashley replied. Execute. They climbed, the wind clawing at the fuselages. At the peak, the updraft caught them, shoving both Apaches upward before dropping them into the calmer air beyond. The supply craft followed, steadier now. The radar station appeared through the haze, a cluster of buildings on a rocky rise, its antenna half shattered, the surrounding slope littered with debris. The landing zone was small and uneven, slick with rain. Kayla guided the supply craft down first, holding a tight defensive pattern with her Apache as the crew unloaded the replacement components. Ashley circled higher, scanning the thermal display for any signs of unexpected visitors. Nothing, just the storm. When the supply craft lifted again, Kayla slid into escort position without a word. The return flight was faster, the wind now at their backs, the typhoon's rotation pulling them toward home. They touched down an hour later, both aircraft intact, mission complete. As the engines wound down, Ashley climbed out of her Apache and walked across the tarmac. Kayla was already on the ground, helmet tucked under one arm, rain streaking her face. Ashley didn't speak right away. She just looked at her, searching for the thing she'd hoped to see. It was there. Not just competence, not just survival. The same quiet certainty Ashley had carried out of Hurricane Isabella all those years ago. You didn't need me out there, Ashley said finally. Kayla smiled faintly. Maybe not, but it helped knowing you were there. Ashley nodded. One day, you'll be the one standing on the catwalk, watching someone else fly their first storm. Months later, Ashley stood in front of a graduating class at Fort Rucker, the first officially certified extreme weather combat pilots. The Carter protocol was now standard in advanced helicopter training. She told them about patterns, about rhythms, about how the atmosphere could be the most dangerous enemy or the strongest ally, depending on how you treated it. Every storm, she said, is a conversation. You can shout at it. Try to drown it out with noise and force, or you can listen. Learn its language, and when you do, you'll find the space where your skill and its power meet. She paused, letting the silence settle before her final words. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts, and in the air. Acting with dignity means knowing when to fight and when to dance. The room was still for a moment. Then the applause came, not loud and chaotic, but steady, like the heartbeat of a rotor. In clean air, Ashley stepped back, letting the next generation take the stage. The storms ahead would be theirs.